The Velthari Imperium had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia without question. Their crystalline warships, each the size of a moon, drifted through space like malevolent gods, their bio-neural networks humming with the collective consciousness of a billion enslaved minds. No species had ever successfully challenged their dominion, until today. Captain Kairos Vex stood on the bridge of the Nightfall, humanity's first and only stealth dreadnought, watching the massive Velthari command vessel eternal supremacy through his tactical display. The ship was a grotesque fusion of technology and living tissue, its hull pulsing with veins of luminescent energy that fed the parasitic overlords within. "Captain, we're receiving the standard submission broadcast," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Nixara Prime, her cybernetic implants glowing softly in the dim red lighting of the bridge. "They're demanding immediate surrender and preparation for harvesting." Harvesting. The word made Kairos's jaw clench. For 3 years, he had watched colony after human colony fall to the Velthari's insatiable hunger. They didn't simply conquer. They consumed entire civilizations, absorbing their knowledge, their technology, their very essence into their collective hive mind. Earth's outer colonies had been the first to fall, then the core worlds, until only scattered fleets of refugees remained. The Nightfall was humanity's last gambit, a ship designed in secret using stolen Velthari biotechnology, cloaked in adaptive matter that bent light and sensor waves around its obsidian hull. It was a ghost ship, invisible to their sensors, carrying humanity's final desperate hope. "Sir," whispered Commander Thrinox Caney from the weapons station, "the prototype cannon is fully charged. We have 1 shot." 1 shot. 3 years of preparation, of sacrifice, of watching worlds burn, all for this single moment. The quantum disruptor cannon had never been tested at full power. It might destroy the Nightfall along with its target, but Kairos had made his peace with that possibility long ago. The Velthari broadcast continued, their artificial voice dripping with contempt. "Primitive humans of vessel designation unknown, you will submit for integration. Resistance is futile. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will strengthen our collective." Kairos looked around his bridge, at Nixara with her fierce determination, at Threnox whose family had died on New Geneva, at the dozen other souls who had volunteered for this suicide mission. They were the last free humans in the galaxy, and they had chosen to make their stand here in the shadow of the enemy's greatest weapon. "Open a channel," Kairos commanded, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the eternal supremacy. The Velthari Prime Commander was a nightmare fusion of flesh and machine, its elongated skull housing a brain that controlled the thoughts of millions. Multiple eyes regarded them with ancient malice. "I am Captain Kairos Vex of the Earth Colonial Fleet," he announced, each word carefully measured. "And I'm here to deliver humanity's response to your ultimatum." The creature's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. "One primitive vessel against the might of the Imperium? Your species' capacity for self-delusion never ceases to entertain us." Kairos smiled, a cold, predatory expression that would have chilled the blood of any human observer. "You've harvested our colonies, enslaved our people, and consumed our worlds. But you made one critical error in your calculations. And what might that be, insect? You never learned to fear the dark." The Nightfall's cloak shimmered and dropped, revealing the sleek obsidian predator that had been stalking the Velthari fleet for weeks. Even as alarms began shrieking across every enemy vessel, Kairos knew they had perhaps 30 seconds before the Imperium's overwhelming firepower would reduce his ship to cosmic dust. "All hands, battle stations," he commanded. "Nixara, execute pattern Omega. Threnox, target their primary neural nexus." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as his crew carried out orders they had drilled 1,000 times. The Nightfall was outnumbered 10,000 to 1, but it had advantages the Velthari had never encountered: human unpredictability and the willingness to embrace tactical insanity. Lieutenant Nixara's fingers danced across her console as she initiated the most dangerous maneuver in their arsenal. The ship's experimental phase drive spun up, creating a localized distortion in space-time. For a brief moment, the Nightfall existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, becoming effectively untouchable as Velthari plasma beams passed harmlessly through their phased hull. "Impossible," the Prime Commander hissed from the view screen. "No species has mastered dimensional warfare except the ones you thought you'd completely harvested," Kairos finished. "Tell me, when you consumed the ethereal collective 3 centuries ago, did you really think you absorbed all their knowledge? Or did some of it slip through your fingers?" The truth was that humanity had found the ruins of a dozen extinct civilizations, each carrying fragments of technologies the Velthari had deemed insignificant during their conquests. It had taken human ingenuity to see how these disparate pieces could fit together into something greater than the sum of their parts. Commander Threnox's targeting array locked onto the Eternal Supremacy's neural nexus, a pulsing organic core, where the collective consciousness of the ship's enslaved minds was housed. "Target acquired, sir. Quantum disruptor ready to fire." The Velthari fleet was closing in, their formation tightening like a noose. Thousands of bioships launched swarms of living missiles that writhed through space like metallic serpents. The Nightfall's point defense systems came online, filling the void with streams of superheated plasma, but there were simply too many incoming threats. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported damage control. "Atmospheric containment holding." Kairos watched the tactical display as his ship's defensive grid began to overload. They had minutes at most before the Velthari overwhelmed their defenses, but the quantum disruptor needed time to build to full power. The weapon drew directly from the ship's reactor core, and rushing the process would result in a catastrophic overload. "Sir, receiving transmission from Refugee Fleet Icarus," Nixara announced. "Admiral Korath is requesting immediate assistance. They're under attack by a Velthari harvester squadron." Kairos closed his eyes for a moment. The refugee fleet contained nearly 2 million survivors, the largest concentration of free humans left in the galaxy. But if he diverted resources to help them, the Nightfall would never complete its mission. "Captain," Commander Threnox said quietly, "we both know what needs to be done." The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. This was why they were here, why they had accepted this suicide mission. The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few, even when those few numbered in the millions. "All civilian vessels," Kairos broadcast on an open channel, "this is the Nightfall. Maintain your current heading and do not deviate. Help is coming." It wasn't technically a lie. If his gambit succeeded, if the quantum disruptor could cripple the Velthari command structure, it might trigger a cascade failure throughout their collective network. Every enslaved mind they had harvested over 3 millennia would suddenly be free, turning their own ships against them from within. The Eternal Supremacy had finally had enough of their defiance. Its primary weapon array began to glow with malevolent energy, a planet-killer beam that had cracked moons in half. "They're charging their main gun," Threnox reported. "Impact in 40 seconds. The quantum disruptor's charge level had reached 90%. Close, but not enough. Not yet. Nixara, transfer all power from life support to the disruptor array." "Sir, that will give us maybe 3 minutes of breathable atmosphere." "Then we'd better make them count." The bridge atmosphere grew thin as life support systems shut down, redirecting every available joule of power to the quantum disruptor. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the faces of Kairos's crew as they worked with grim determination, knowing that failure meant not just their deaths, but the extinction of their entire species. "Charge at 97%, Threnox reported, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Sir, I'm detecting something unusual in their neural network. The enslaved minds, they're responding to our presence. On the tactical display, faint energy signatures were flickering. Throughout the Velthari fleet, buried deep within the bio-neural networks of each ship, the absorbed consciousness of 1,000 conquered species was stirring. Somehow, the mere sight of human defiance was awakening something that had been dormant for centuries. "They remember," whispered Nixara, her cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's sensors. "Captain, I'm picking up fragmentary transmissions from within their hulls. It's like an echo of who they used to be." The Prime Commander's image on the view screen flickered with interference as competing signals fought for control of the communication array. For a brief moment, alien faces flashed across the display, species that had been extinct for millennia, their final moments preserved in the collective consciousness like flies in amber. "What sorcery is this?" the Prime Commander demanded. But its voice was no longer singular. Other voices were bleeding through, speaking in languages that had been silenced centuries ago. Kairos realized what was happening. The Velthari's greatest strength, their ability to absorb and control other minds, was becoming their greatest weakness. Every consciousness they had harvested was still there, buried but not destroyed, waiting for a catalyst to break free. "The weapon isn't just targeting their command ship," he said with growing amazement. "It's targeting their entire collective network. We're not just going to destroy them. We're going to liberate everyone they've ever enslaved, the Eternal." Supremacy's planet killer beam reached full charge, its energy signature blazing like a newborn star. In 15 seconds, it would fire and reduce the nightfall to constituent atoms. But the quantum disruptor had finally reached 100% power, its exotic matter core stabilized and ready to unleash 3 years of humanity's desperate innovation. "All hands, brace for—" Kairos's words were cut off as the ship lurched violently to starboard. On the view screen, he saw something impossible. One of the Velthari escort vessels had opened fire on the Eternal Supremacy, its weapons carving deep gouges in the command ship's biohull. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the attacking vessel," Nixara reported, her voice filled with wonder. "It's in Old Aldebaran, the language of the Keepers of Memory." The Keepers had been one of the first species the Velthari had conquered, their entire civilization absorbed into the collective over 2,000 years ago. But now their ancient war cry was echoing across the battlefield as more escort ships began turning on their masters. "We remember our names," the transmitted voice declared. "We remember our worlds. We remember our freedom." The Prime Commander's image was fragmenting now, multiple personalities fighting for control of its body. "This is impossible. The integration process is absolute. You cannot—" "Cannot what?" Kairos interrupted. "Cannot resist? Cannot fight back? You've harvested 1,000,000 species, but you never understood the most important thing about consciousness. It can never truly be destroyed, only hidden." Chaos erupted throughout the Velthari fleet as centuries of enslaved minds began asserting their independence. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated moments before were now firing on each other in a cacophony of liberation and revenge. The carefully maintained order of the collective was collapsing into beautiful anarchy. "Quantum disruptor fully charged and ready to fire," Thrinox announced. Kairos looked at the tactical display one final time. The shot would not just destroy the Eternal Supremacy, it would send a resonance cascade through the quantum entanglement field that connected every Velthari ship in the galaxy. Every harvested mind would suddenly find itself free to act, to remember, to choose. "Fire," he commanded. The nightfall shuddered as it released 3 years of accumulated fury in a single, devastating beam. The quantum disruptor's energy lance punched through space-time itself, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of every species that had ever dared to resist tyranny. The quantum disruptor beam struck the Eternal Supremacy with the force of a collapsing star, but instead of the expected explosion, something far more extraordinary occurred. The beam's exotic particles interacted with the ship's bio-neural network, creating a resonance cascade that propagated through the quantum entanglement field, connecting every Velthari vessel across the galaxy. Kairos watched in amazement as the massive command ship began to transform. Its monstrous biomechanical hull was literally reshaping itself as millions of enslaved consciousnesses suddenly remembered who they had been before their absorption. Organic. Conduits rerouted themselves, weapon systems realigned, and the ship's very structure became a battlefield between the Velthari overlords and their former victims. "Captain, I'm reading massive quantum fluctuations across the entire sector," Nixara reported, her cybernetic implants glowing brighter as they processed the incredible amount of data. "The cascade is spreading. Every Velthari ship within 100 light-years is experiencing the same liberation event." The view screen split into multiple feeds showing scenes of controlled chaos throughout the enemy fleet. On one ship, a group of liberated Xantoran engineers was systematically sabotaging the propulsion systems. On another, former crystalline. Collective architects were rebuilding weapon arrays to fire on their former captors. Most incredibly, some ships were physically splitting apart as different species reclaimed their original technologies. The Prime Commander's image flickered back onto the main display, but it was no longer the same entity. Its elongated skull was fracturing, revealing the individual minds that had been forcibly merged into its consciousness. When it spoke, it was with a dozen different voices representing a dozen different extinct civilizations. "What have you done?" it shrieked, but the words came out in multiple languages simultaneously. "The collective is eternal. The integration cannot be reversed." "Evolution," Kairos replied simply. "You spent so long absorbing other species that you forgot the most basic principle of survival: adaptation. You became dependent on your victims, and now they're taking back what was always theirs." Commander Threenox was monitoring the liberation cascade with growing excitement. "Sir, we're receiving thousands of transmissions from across the galaxy. Velthari ships are turning on each other everywhere. The liberation is spreading faster than light through their quantum communication network." The tactical display showed a galaxy-wide revolution in real time. Red dots representing Velthari-controlled systems were flickering to green as liberated civilizations reclaimed their homeworlds. In some cases, entire star systems were spontaneously declaring independence, as their enslaved populations broke free from centuries of mental bondage. But the liberation came at a cost. The Nightfall had expended nearly all its power in the quantum disruptor attack, and now the ship was drifting helplessly as Velthari loyalist vessels closed in for the kill. The escorts that hadn't been affected by the cascade were converging, on their position, their weapons charging for a final strike. "Hull integrity at 40%, reported the damage control officer. "Engineering reports that we've got maybe 10 minutes of life support left." Kairos made his decision. "All hands abandon ship. Get to the escape pods and transmit our location to any friendly vessels in the area." "Sir, respectfully, no," Nixara said firmly. "We started this together, we finish it together." "That's an order, Lieutenant." "With respect, Captain, you're not the only one who gets to make grand gestures." Before Kairos could respond, the ship's communication array crackled to life with a transmission from the refugee fleet Icarus. Admiral Korath's weathered face appeared on a secondary screen, his expression grim but determined. "Nightfall. This is Admiral Korath. We've received your liberation cascade and are witnessing the impossible across the galaxy. Our ships are en route to your position, but we're 20 minutes out. Can you hold?" "Negative, Admiral. We're dead in space with multiple hostiles inbound. Execute Protocol 7. Document everything that's happened here and make sure it reaches the other refugee fleets." "Understood, Captain. It's been an honor." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in solemn silence. Around them, the greatest revolution in galactic history was unfolding, but they would not live to see its conclusion. Then, impossibly, the Eternal Supremacy moved to intercept the incoming Loyalist vessels. The massive command ship had completely transformed. Its biomechanical hull now displayed the architectural styles of dozens of different species, as if each liberated civilization was asserting its cultural identity through the ship's very structure. When it opened fire, its weapons weren't the familiar Velthari plasma beams, but a symphony of different technologies working in perfect harmony. "This is the Liberation Fleet Eternal Defiance," came a transmission from the transformed vessel. "We speak for all those who were silenced, for all those who were forgotten. We stand with the humans who gave us back our voices." The battle that followed would be recorded in the annals of galactic history as the Day of Voices, the moment when 3 millennia of enforced silence was broken by the fury of the liberated. The Eternal Defiance, no longer a Velthari command ship, but something entirely new, led a fleet of transformed vessels against the remaining Loyalist forces. Kairos watched from the crippled bridge of the Nightfall as his desperate gambit exceeded every possible expectation. What had begun as a suicide mission to weaken the Velthari Imperium had instead triggered the complete collapse of their collective consciousness. Ships across the galaxy were splitting into their component civilizations, some choosing to work together while others struck out on their own to reclaim long-lost homeworlds. "Captain, we're receiving priority transmissions from 17 different star systems," Nixara reported, her voice filled with wonder. "They're all declaring independence and requesting to join something they're calling the Liberation Alliance." The Eternal Defiance had finished mopping up the last of the Loyalist vessels and was now approaching the Nightfall with obvious care. Its transformed hull had stabilized into a magnificent fusion of architectural styles, Zentauran crystal matrices intertwining with keepers of memory geometric patterns, all anchored by the practical engineering approaches of a dozen other extinct civilizations. "Nightfall, this is Collective Speaker Zephaniah of the Liberation Fleet," came a transmission. "We are prepared to offer immediate assistance and transport. Your sacrifice has given us back our freedom. Now let us give you back your life. Zephaniah." Kairos recognized the name from the historical archives, the last elected leader of the Stellar Confederation, a multi-species democracy that had been absorbed by the Velthari over 800 years ago. Somehow, impossibly, she had not only survived within the collective consciousness, but had become a leader among the liberated minds. "Speaker Zephaniah," Kairos replied, "it's an honor to meet you, even under these circumstances. We accept your assistance." As rescue shuttles launched from the Eternal Defiance, Commander Threnox was monitoring the cascade's continued spread across the galaxy. "Sir, latest reports show that over 60% of all Velthari vessels have experienced liberation events. The remaining Loyalist ships are retreating to their core worlds, but they're being pursued by liberated fleets." The scope of what they had accomplished was staggering. In the span of a few hours, the galaxy's most oppressive empire was not just being defeated, it was being transformed from within. Every species the Velthari had ever conquered was suddenly free to rebuild, to remember, to choose their own destiny. But as the rescue shuttle docked with the Nightfall, Kairos knew their work was far from over. Liberation was only the first step. What came next would determine whether this moment of triumph would lead to lasting peace or descend into chaos as dozens of species settled ancient grievances. The shuttle bay doors opened to reveal Speaker Zephaniah herself, a tall, ethereal being whose appearance seamlessly blended features from multiple species, as if her consciousness had learned to express itself through the physical characteristics of all the civilizations she had encountered within the collective. "Captain." "Vex," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke to something deep in the human soul. "You have given us the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to remember who we were before the darkness. But now we face an even greater challenge." "The reconstruction," Kairos nodded. How do we build something better from the ashes of the old order? Together, Zephaniah replied simply. Your species may be few in number, but you have proven something. That the galaxy had forgotten. That the will to resist tyranny burns eternal in the hearts of the free. We propose something unprecedented. A true galactic democracy where every voice matters, every species has representation, and no single civilization holds dominion over another. Through the shuttle's viewports, Kairos could see other rescue, vessels converging on refugee fleet positions throughout the sector. The liberated Velthari ships were not just evacuating human survivors, they were actively seeking out every remaining pocket of free civilization, offering aid and alliance to anyone who had resisted the old order. The Liberation Alliance, Nixara mused. It has a certain ring to it. It will need a constitution, Threenox added practically. Rules of engagement, territorial agreements, trade protocols. The logistics alone will be staggering. Speaker Zephaniah smiled, an expression that somehow incorporated the joy of 100 different species. Then it's fortunate that we have representatives from every major civilization that ever existed. Between us, we possess the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of the entire galaxy. What we lack is the one thing your species has in abundance: the audacity to believe that the impossible is merely another word for hasn't been tried yet. As the Nightfall's crew transferred to the rescue shuttle, Kairos took one last look at his ship. She had been humanity's last hope, their final desperate gambit against an impossible enemy. Now she was something more, a symbol of what could be accomplished when ordinary people refused to accept the unacceptable. Sir, Nixara said quietly, what do we tell the history books? Kairos considered the question as they prepared to dock with the Eternal Defiance. Around them, the galaxy was being reborn in ways no one could have imagined. Extinct civilizations were returning from the grave. Ancient enemies were becoming allies, and the very concept of empire was being replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. We tell them the truth, he said finally, that freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you take, and once you've tasted it, you'll do anything to keep it. 6 months later, Captain Kairos Vex stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Station, humanity's first contribution to the Liberation Alliance. The massive space station, built in the gravitational neutral zone between 12 star systems, served as the capital of what was being called the New Constellation, a democratic federation of over 200 species, most of whom had been considered extinct until the Liberation Cascade. The assembly hall itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Zentaran crystal acoustics ensured that every word spoken could be heard clearly by all present, while Keeper geometric principles created a space where beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs could coexist comfortably. The atmospheric processors maintained 17 different breathing mixtures, and the artificial gravity fields could be adjusted for species that ranged from gas-based energy beings to dense silicon-based life forms. Today marked the ratification of the Constellation Charter, the document that would formally establish the first truly representative government in galactic history. Every species, regardless of their numbers or technological capabilities, would have an equal voice in the governance of their shared future. Honored delegates, Speaker Zephaniah addressed the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, of suppressed dreams. We gather here not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals. The Velthari believed that unity could only be achieved through dominance. Today, we prove that it can be achieved through choice. Kairos watched from the human delegations section as representatives from across the galaxy voiced their support for the Charter. The ethereal collective's energy-based beings danced their approval in patterns of pure light. The silicon minds of Kepler's Edge transmitted their agreement through harmonic resonances that made the station's hull ring like a bell. Even the mysterious deep dwellers, who communicated only through gravitational fluctuations, had found a way to express their consent. Admiral Korath, now serving as humanity's primary representative, leaned over to whisper to Kairos. "Hard to believe that 6 months ago we were running for our lives in converted cargo haulers. Now look at us, founding members of a galactic democracy. It hadn't been easy. The Liberation Cascade had freed hundreds of species, but freedom and unity were very different things. Ancient territorial disputes had reignited, resource conflicts had emerged, and some species had initially tried to establish their own mini-empires. It had taken months of patient negotiation, mediated by the collective wisdom of the liberated minds, to forge a framework that could accommodate such incredible diversity. The key breakthrough had come from an unexpected source: the Velthari themselves. The few remaining loyalist enclaves, stripped of their collective consciousness network, had faced a choice between extinction and adaptation. Many had chosen adaptation, contributing their advanced biotechnology to the Alliance in exchange for protection and representation. "The vote is unanimous," announced the Assembly's AI coordinator, its voice a harmonized blend of every language, spoken in the chamber. "The Constellation Charter is hereby ratified. Long may the free stars shine." The celebration that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Music from 100 worlds filled the hall as species that had been extinct for millennia shared their cultural treasures with civilizations they had never met. The singing crystals of Andromeda performed a harmony with the storm speakers of the void, while the pattern weavers displayed stories told in pure mathematics that brought tears to the optical sensors of the silicon mines. Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded, Kairos found himself in the observation deck of Nexus Station, looking out at the incredible sight beyond. The space around the station was filled with ships representing every member species of the Alliance, a fleet more diverse and numerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Speaker Zephaniah joined him at the viewport, her form shifting slightly, as different aspects of her composite consciousness admired the view. "Your species chose well when they named this the new constellation," she observed. "Like stars, we are each unique, yet together we light the darkness." "What happens now?" Kairos asked. "We've established the framework, but implementing it across hundreds of star systems, the challenges are going to be enormous." "Every great journey begins with a single step," Zephaniah replied. 3,000 years ago, the Velthari took their first step toward galactic dominion. 6 months ago, you took the first step toward galactic liberation. Today, we all take the first step toward something that has never existed: true galactic democracy. A new transmission crackled through the station's communication array. It was from the frontier regions, where Alliance exploration fleets were making contact with previously unknown civilizations. Each new discovery brought fresh perspectives and challenges, but also new opportunities for cooperation and growth. "Captain Vex," came the transmission. "This is Explorer Ship Harmony's Edge. We've made contact with a species that has been hiding in dark space for over a millennium, avoiding the Velthari by masking their entire solar system. They're requesting to speak with the human who taught the galaxy to remember its name." Kairos smiled at the poetic phrasing. In the months since the liberation, humanity had gained a reputation as the species that refused to surrender, that found hope in hopeless situations. It was a reputation he was proud to bear, but also one that came with tremendous responsibility. "Tell them we'll be there within the week," he replied, "and remind them that they're not speaking with just one human. They're speaking with representatives of every free species in the galaxy." As the Nightfall 2, humanity's new flagship, prepared to depart Nexus Station, Kairos took one last look at the impossible sight outside. Thousands of ships from hundreds of species, all working together toward a common goal. The dark age of the Velthari Imperium was over. The age of the free stars had begun. In the distance, space itself seemed to shimmer with possibility as the Alliance's newly developed quantum communication network carried messages of hope and cooperation to every corner of the galaxy. Worlds that had been silent for millennia were awakening to find themselves part of something greater than they had ever imagined. The human who had defied an empire had become the catalyst for something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based not on conquest, but on consent, not on the dominance of the strong, but on the cooperation of the free. And in the depths of space, where new stars were being born from the cosmic dust of ancient supernovas, the future itself seemed to whisper a promise that freedom, once ignited, would burn eternal among the stars.